Hi, I'm Bella Savignano. I'm an administrator in the Fine Art Department and on the Subculture sale here at Swann Galleries, and this is what's in my auction. So one of the really exciting and sort of like esoteric pieces from the sale is this little box that contains a psychedelic happening construction kit. It was published by the American Publishing Corporation in 1966, and it marks in bold letters that it is has something to do with LSD, though they call it ludicrous systems development, I imagine for some sort of publishing need to censor themselves. But in it is a large collection of cardboard pieces that all interlink, and they could be constructed and built and interlocked in any way the participant sees fit. And it looks quite a bit like a children's toy, but it is not. The publishing of this kit happened at the same time as the rise of recreational LSD. Timothy Leary was in his fame. LSD was sort of starting to take hold as a recreational drug for the young folk and began to influence the way that music and fashion and art were created. We see that in the work of Pink Floyd, in the work of Jimi Hendrix, and then in fashion with Granny Takes a Trip and Apple Boutique and these other psychedelic artistic outputs where the use of LSD is clear in the way that the art was created. But for the everyday person who wanted to recreationally use LSD and didn't have any art to make, that's where this kit came in. It's sort of purposeless, there's no answer. It features a number of different patterns and graphics that may have been a little bit jarring to see while one was on LSD. But it's a really interesting piece that's very evocative of its time in the 60s and something that, we would never see commercially produced today. So this is a really exciting piece by the artist Jane Bauman, who came up in the 70s and 80s in the graffiti art and stenciling scenes of both the Bay Area and New York. She got her start in San Francisco in the 60s, where she was getting her master's degree, and started to create amongst the punks and the DIY scene of the Bay Area, where the sort of frugality and mass communication and this DIY ethos was kind of at the forefront of what they were making and producing, whether that be in music or in art. She notes a lot of collaboration between artists and musicians at the time. She did work with a number of punk bands in the area, and that is actually where she met her boyfriend, known as Mark C., and his band Crop. And then they ended up relocating to New York at the end of the 70s into the early 80s. She settled down in the East Village, paid almost no money to live there, and she started creating artwork and stencil art for his new band, Live Skull. Live Skull is one of the bands that came up at the forefront of this sort of avant-garde noise scene in the early 80s that gave birth to Sonic Youth, Lydia Lunch, and Swans, other notable bands from that period. And this is one example of a stenciled work she made with the Live Skull stencil. It's really beautiful and really sort of evocative of the ethos of that time, which was to do things yourself and to do them cheaply and to mass produce. And it also sort of speaks to the nature of the East Village at this time, which is quite gritty, and it's kind of a fun piece because though it's here on paper, we don't know where else this was stenciled. The stencil came in handy with illicit uses, forms of publication, spray painting on buildings and on private property, not to accuse the artist of such things, but this is a great example that sort of represents the kind of community and the art that she was making and the scene she was coming up in, which is really special. So this piece is one of the most exciting pieces in the sale. It is a very scarce example of original work by Jamie Reid, the famed artist who just passed away in 2013. The work shows a sort of incredible visual example of the 10 Lessons, which is sort of the guiding principle of The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, the 1980 mockumentary narrated by the Sex Pistols manager, Malcolm McLaren, which shows this sort of falsified, dramatized version of the birth, the rise, and the fall of the Sex Pistols, in which McLaren goes over the 10 lessons to having a world-famous band and the 10 sort of steps that people need to follow to be able to achieve the level of fame that the Sex Pistols did. And in typical Sex Pistols fashion, they're outrageous and insane. But this work was created by the British artist Jamie Reid, who was associated with the Sex Pistols through a number of works he did for them, most notably the cover of Anarchy in the UK, God Save the Queen, famous evocative symbols of the British punk scene and the Sex Pistols that have really transcended time. Reid met McLaren at art school in the 60s in London, where they had very strong political leanings. They attempted to organize a protest together, it fell through, and then Reid ended up making his way to Paris in May of 1968, which is when the Parisian student rebellion took place, and he saw an incredible amount of activism. He saw a number of artworks and art movements that he was incredibly interested in, and this guided his whole career. So he starts making work for the Sex Pistols after getting a call from McLaren in the mid-70s, and this is one of the works that he made a little bit later in regards to this film. This work came from a mid-80s show at the Josh Behr Gallery in New York and was shown alongside a number of his works. It was somewhat of a retrospective, showing works that he had made through the 60s and the 70s. In a review of Reid's show at the Josh Behr Gallery, the writer Carlo McCormick writes for Artforum, Reid has helped to fuel and even to focus the nihilistic rage of his contemporaries, and one can only hope that his mock advertising slogans are less a matter of nostalgia than they are signs of a subversive spirit that will never be entirely wiped out. We really don't see these types of works from Jamie Reid on the market. There's a number of his lithographs and prints and posters, but one of these original works of collage, which he was known for, is incredibly scarce, and this one's really cool because it has the sort of textual reference to the Great Rock and Roll Swindle alongside a number of visual references to the film. We get ticket stubs and stills and a number of wonderful photos from the movie, and it's very, very cool.